Check one, check two. Check one, check two. Check, check, check. 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 Check, check, check. Check one, check two.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I guess we will get started. Can everyone hear me in the back? That was just thumbs up anyway. All right, so just going to make the land acknowledgement before we get going, because that's an important thing to do, to basically acknowledge the land that we're on and the people and persons that were here thousands of years before us. So the University of Calgary is located in the heart of southern Alberta, if you hadn't known that. Both acknowledges and pays tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprises the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, the Bearspaw, and the Goodstoney First Nations. And the city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I am your speaker tonight, you may have noticed. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Electrical and Software Engineering. I'm also the associate head of graduate studies. I'm the director of the university's cleanroom facility. And I have also founded a startup company called Neurora Biotech. So I've got a little bit of experience dealing with lots of things. And what we're going to talk about today is related to everything you're doing in the capstones and in Launchpad. And it's something I deal with a lot in my role as a director of the cleanroom facility, because we make prototypes for researchers and local businesses. Okay? And so we have this idea of this prototyping. You've probably heard of prototyping. There's Agile product development, which hopefully some of you are learning as we go through Launchpad, and I'll talk on that briefly. But you've already heard me talking too much. So I've got a question for you. Why do we build prototypes?
To know where things lead.
Anything else?
Prevent something potential wrong.
Sorry, what was that?
Prevent something going wrong.
To prevent something going wrong. Usually you want your prototypes to go wrong, then you learn things. So,
To convince VC that it's feasible.
to convince VCs, maybe that's now getting into a minimal viable product potentially. So that not just the prototype, but to convince people is a very good one. It could be your friends, it could be your manager, it could be other people in your community, it could be your teammates. Sometimes they're very hard to give advice to.
Get early feedback.
Correct. That one. Test your assumptions. Linking back to the first point, yes. You're going the other way. That's more into the MVP as well. But the comment there was to get into the idea of production costs. Your prototype generally doesn't get you to that. That's more of your minimum viable product. But we'll get there, because there is overlap. Right? So these are all really, really good points. So with the one that you mentioned about kind of for VCs, it can be used for pitch purposes as well. VCs might want to see more of a minimal viable product than a prototype, but a prototype can be used in a pitch to start that process going, hopefully. So there's quite a few things that you can do that. So I'm going to spend a chunk of time talking about the difference between a prototype and an MVP. And there's a bit of a picture here of people fighting kind of thing. It's black and white, so it's a grey area, right? There are many, many different ways of talking about the things that you are making and developing, right? So what we try and say is the prototypes are essentially, and that's it can change, an early stage visual representation of your ideas, right? It might not be the final thing, but it's your early ideas, right? And you can share it with potential customers, potentially with investors, maybe, depending on how good it is, and some people's are very, very good, right? It's a visualization of your idea. But there's many, many kind of different types that we can talk about, right? And as I said, it could be talking to your teammates saying, I've got this great idea, I want to try this. And they're going, that's silly. Look, I've made it. Here's a prototype that can do it. So what do we mean by all this? The obvious one is kind of just a drawing, the old classic back of the napkin. Sketch out something else. Has anybody seen Glass Onion? The movie? It's all about the piece of the napkin, the piece of paper that the idea was written on, right? Nowadays, it's a lot easier to do what is known as digital renderings and animations, right? You've got a lot of CAD software out there now, even freeware that you can use. Short videos are useful, depending on what your application is, to give an insight of how somebody might interact with it. And then we have the classic ones where, if you say to kind of like the general public a prototype, they're going to think of the ones where we say a scaled model, or maybe a functional prototype that you've built with a 3D printer, some Lego, some wire, a bit of string, those kinds of things, where you've got something more tangible to actually put into somebody's hand and to get that kind of feedback from. One that a lot of people miss, or they might loop it into kind of the drawings and markups, is a storyboard of how you move forward using potentially an app, moving forward, how you use an app, or how you envision this will be used, right? So, sorry.
Do you recommend storyboards for physical products as well, if they use this part?
Okay, the question was, do I recommend storyboarding for physical prototypes? This can give you an idea of what your user might do with it. So you might have not built your product, you've got the idea, and you're going, here is a can of Coke. How are they going to hold it? If it's too big, I'm not going to use it. I'm going to can it go down? Have an angled base? Does it fit on here? Things like this. You can think about potential use cases, which will then feed back into how potentially you might do your physical design. A lot of times now, we can jump into 3D printing very quickly, right? And so we can actually visualize, take our vision and put it into an initial format, physical format to work with. I'll talk about that a little bit as well. Storyboards are also very good for showing people to how you work through the process, right? The classic one, if you ever looked at any of the kind of behind the scenes of movie making, there's storyboards everywhere, because they're storyboarding to work out where they're going to put their cameras, what they need to be in shot, where people are going to come in. It gives them a lot of information about how to set up their physical shoot. And you can do that for yourselves on that. Okay. So there's a lot of prototyping terminology out there. I'm doing well today. It's been a long day. Okay. I'm going to take some of the ones from this particular book, because most of my students work in the biomedical engineering space. There are going to be different terminology used by different professionals in different fields of study. So, big caveat there. You will have to get to know the terminology in the field you're in, right? And that can include the terminology that your customers might want to use, right? So there's many ways of doing it. They can all have slightly different meanings, and all designers don't necessarily agree, right? So when you're doing kind of research in the lab, you're doing what may be an early prototype, or what potentially you're doing, some of you might be doing here initially. You're trying to find this first concept there. So you might get here something called a feasibility. Oh, I've got this feasibility prototype. Proof of concept, right? It's the most basic you can get. It's pretty simple. And then, though, you can move up. And you go, okay, we've had a little bit of feedback. Right? We now want to incorporate some of that, move it to the next one, tweak it a little bit. This is where you're going to get things where it says, it's a looks like, it's a mock-up, it's a works like prototype. The buttons might actually do something, a light might actually flash. The first one might have just had buttons that didn't do anything, but people were giving you feedback on how you could hold it, for instance. Right? This next one is confusing. The minimally viable prototype. Not an MVP, which the P is product. Basically, you've got the minimum features in your prototype. You haven't solved any of the design work. It's very rough around the edges. It's minimal, but it will do something that you then can give to a client, your user group, even yourselves, and say, yeah, when we slide this here, that moves over there and it goes bing, for instance. And it does it. It's the minimal thing it needs to do. Functional prototype, again, it's doing something. It's slightly functional, but it's not going to do everything, right? It's not an actual product yet. It's not been refined. You might at this point say, well, this is my final prototype. Now I'm going to basically try and stop the development cycle. Now I want to work out how to manufacture it. And that's where you get to the next one, which is production prototypes. You've locked in the idea of the shape, the size, the feel. You have an idea of what the materials are going to be, and you may know who's going to make it for you. You'll have your design drawings and things like that. You want to get, this is as close as you're going to get to your market device. And now you're going to do that last test and build it and say, here's my potentially next generation, my MVP, my minimum viable product. And other groups might say, this is my alpha device or my beta device, depending on where they're at. This is a frozen design, right? We've had a design freeze at that point. We're not changing the functionality. We know what to do. Now we just need to work out how we make it. Right? So this is when you'll see, this is again a blurry line to the MVP, the minimal viable product. This is where you have something that you're pretty proud of, and you can like say, does anybody want to buy this kind of thing? You're hopefully at that point with getting that kind of information. And there's a reason why you kind of go through these steps. If you are a perfectionist and you try and go straight into kind of your production prototype, what do you think is going to happen? It's probably not going to work, right? And this comes back to that concept of good enough, right? So when we get to a minimum viable product, it's going to be good enough to satisfy something. Your prototype has to be good enough to do the things you want it to do. For you as groups, you want to ask yourself, you're busy developing things, you're doing it in the capstone, you're doing your design roadmap document, right? What is the point of your prototype? Why are you building it? Who are you going to show it to? What is it going to do for you to move you along the ladder or move you along the process to getting potentially, an ultimate product and revenue? Don't just build something because you can, right? And this comes back to knowing why you are building things, why you are doing things, what your customer wants, right? You can make a very nice prototype, be very fancy. You can go from extruded plastic to a 3D printed device to a very nice SLA printed device to something that's milled on a CNC milling machine, and then you give it to a potential client and they go, oh, it's the wrong shape, right? So it would have been better to give them the very kind of basic wire extruded 3D printed model initially to say, oh yeah, no, I like this way, right? Then do the next steps. So always work out what the prototype is for, how it's going to help you move to the next step. And as for the engineers in the crowd, we just love to jump on a 3D printer or a CAD software, go, ooh, it's great. That's why you need to talk to the customers, the marketing people, look at where you're going with these things. So there's lots of ways, and terminology out there. Learn the terminology. And this is just a couple of ways people phrase them. Whatever industry you go into, make sure you find out what they mean by a pre-production prototype, a production prototype, a frozen design. What does it mean in that context for you? Because every single field, and we've got multiple fields of the different groups in here, right, are going to have different ideas of what that means. Make sure you're talking the same language. Right? Because if you turn up with the prototype, give it to the client, they say, oh, I was expecting something different as a prototype. You're like, oh, whoops. You've wasted time, effort, don't look good to your client. Get that communication going. All right. So I've already alluded to this. There's different levels of prototypes. So one way of doing it is saying it has fidelity, right? the level of detail the device has, the level of functionality that your prototype has. It might just do one thing, it might do two things. Hopefully it does them right. So there's different ways that you can choose to pick that device. So I've given an example with the 3D printing. You are going to start with something basic and kind of go up a spectrum to hopefully just before you have your minimal viable product. Okay? And depending what you're doing, where you are, you'll have different options that you can do for that. There's different ways of doing this. So what we want to do is a low fidelity prototype. Who thinks, what's a low fidelity prototype? It's really quick to make, right? It's going to visualize your idea. Hopefully it costs not a lot. It will hopefully validate your concept. And you can use it for brainstorming, potentially getting some initial feedback, looking at designs. What do you think we could be using as a low fidelity prototype? I've already given you some examples earlier. Hint.
Like wireframe something?
Yep. Anybody else?
An app interface that's been designed in PowerPoint.
You're moving ahead of the game, and that's actually borderline between a low and a high. But I'll get there. Okay, that was a good one. The comment in the back for those online was using PowerPoint slides to emulate an app, and you just move through the slides as opposed to actually having an app. I'm going to talk about those. Yeah.
BlackBerry prototype, there's the wood.
Yep. Bingo. Low cost, cheap, easy to do. So things like sketches and drawings, for sure. This is actually a backpack that was developed using cardboard. All that stuff you did when the kids in kindergarten, it's useful, right? Cardboard and string. They got ideas of user functionality, shape, fit, and they didn't have to make anything out of fabric. They got a lot of interesting information very quickly. This one I particularly like, especially with the comment about BlackBerry. They made a handset, and there's a hole in it. You can see the hole here, yeah? And then you'll see there's another slide here. And they were just literally, if you press this button, you slide it across, and that will tell you what the next screen here is. They were working out how all the different layers and the menus would work. They didn't have to build the software to do it. They didn't have to bother with any coding. They just worked out the structure, and then they coded it, right? And that's the next level prototype. Very simple, but very useful. And you can show that to other people. Say, what do you think about the way we're doing this? How many times have you gone through an app where you're going, why have I spent 5 minutes pressing 10 buttons to do one thing, right? That gets you a user interface kind of software concept through before you actually build any software. Then we've already got the high fidelity style prototypes, so we've already had a comment on that, so I'll just move into this. This is like, higher functionality. So this would be the piece of software with the app where hopefully when you press the buttons, the screens move. You're going to test the basic functionality. You're going to give it to somebody. I mean, all of you are going to be playing with it in your actual group, in your company, in your venture. But then you're going to start giving it to other people. And yeah, more time, more money. So you're investing time and money now to actually implement the low fidelity prototype. Moving it up the scale, getting something that's nearer to your product. And so there's a clickable app thing called Figma. I'll mention that a bit more about that in a minute. But it's that concept of it just allows you to make very simple things on a screen, and then you just click through without you having to write the source code or anything like that. Physical tools. You can build things, as was mentioned, out of wood, right? The example of wood for BlackBerry, they would have sketched it beforehand. They had an idea of the dimensions. You can't, well, now we've got iPads that are this size, but can you hold that phone? They had ideas already before they actually made it in wood, and then they got more feedback. And then you can do, depending on whether you need this, an intricately scaled model, if you're in more of the civil engineering side or something that's large. Has anybody seen all the old style videos of how you used to do aerodynamic testing for planes? You'd have an actual model, you'd have a model of the plane, maybe in wood, usually in metal, and you'd stick it in a wind tunnel, and you'd have some smoke, and you'd blow the wind over it, and you'd see how the air flew across it, and then you would film it, because we didn't have simulation software then, and we couldn't do all that flow visualization, right? So that was a scale model of a plane. And they still do that kind of testing for Formula One cars. They'll put them into a room with a massive airflow and test the downforce and drag. But that's after they've done a lot of simulation work before they build those things. Right. So there's those kind of models that you can do. And nowadays, there's other things you can do. Who's used AI, artificial intelligence? Have you used it for visualization purposes? Big smile there. Yeah. This is an interesting area because you can get some very bad results. But it's also, you can get some very simple, quick ideas. So I'm just going to use the Microsoft Bing integrated version in this particular one with Bidali 3. And essentially, you type in text. So there's a text down there, which basically says, show me a render of a transparent smartwatch. 2 seconds later, that's what you get. And then you go, oh, actually, can you give me a red strap? 2 seconds later. Oh, actually, I want it to have a blue watch face because I'm kind of trendy. And actually, it's a smartwatch. I wanted to add heart rate monitor. At no point here have you built anything. At no point here did somebody say, the strap has to be this wide, the material is going to be this thick, the dial has to be this big, it needs so many buttons. None of that has been inputted. So as soon as you start going, right, I want less buttons, I want this, I want that, you can refine very quickly to get to that initial visual prototype and get feedback straight away. It is extremely powerful and it is going to change things. One of my grad students actually gave a presentation to my research group the other day explaining a lot of this stuff to me because I haven't used it myself. And it's quite powerful what you can do with it. So those of you who are good at presentations and stuff like that, you can use these to give a very good indication of what your device will look like, what your product might look like, and get good feedback. However, there's a big caveat. Does anybody know what it is?
Some of these models are prone to aliasing, which is basically where it plagiarizes someone else's work.
Correct.
And so you want to see if that already exists or not.
So you can do a Google reverse image search to make sure that this isn't actually a stolen image, right? There's actually, in the copyright realm, there's ways of putting information embedded into a picture now that will mess up artificial intelligence scanning.
Yeah, it's called Nightshade.
That's the one, because it's a poison. Nightshade. There's another issue though, linked to what I just said. You don't own the copyright because this has been generated using AI. So if you were to go and use this and say, this is our final product, and show the picture, no. You can say this is a rendering, this is a suggestion. You can't say, I claim copyright of this, because it's been generated using Microsoft Bing and many other kind of inputs and stuff. So you don't own it. So it's great for visualization, but be careful there. If there's any issues where you want to have a very fancy design that has got unique features that you think is going to make your product unique, you might not want to use this to render it. Because down the line, that might get you all sorts of problems. And this is a current issue with whole AI and generative text and ChatGPT and all that sort of stuff. Who owns the copyright? Where's it coming from? And what do you do with it? And once you've put all this stuff in and generated it, it's there in the system already. It's now part of the database that the system will use. So that's one of the reasons why you might want to keep your stuff secret until you want to show it yourselves. Why didn't go anywhere? There we go. So the goals of our prototype, kind of recapping a little bit on that one, is you're going to test your concept. Hopefully with the real world for the first time in some kind of environment that you know it's going to be used in. It's going to help you communicate, for sure, right? And anybody that's working with this, anybody that sees it, they're going to go, that's great. They might give you feedback, I want this, I want that. And that then you can incorporate and build into the next part of your prototype. You can test the functionality of the idea, and you can start moving to this idea, what I said earlier, start getting an idea of the build of materials, what the products, components you might need. You might start getting an idea of, well, we made this on a 3D printer, but we can't make thousands of these on a 3D printer. So do we then have to change our design to fit the idea for injection molding, for instance? But you've already shown that the concept works. And that's when you start moving into, okay, I need to make a product out of this. I need to do something that can be made in the hundreds of thousands. 3D printing isn't going to cut it, right? So you're getting an idea of the functionality of the idea, getting validation on it, and what potential tech might be useful for you to make it with. And depending on if you've got an idea for a product or multiple products or product evolution, you'll get an idea of what people want first and what you should maybe focus on before you actually build everything, right? And that's the classic, look at Apple and the iPhone and all the other phones and things out there. They always have functionality added on, but the basics, the original iPhone was pretty basic, right? And again, you get this idea of what you might need, supplies. One of the things there, but I mentioned 3D printing, I've mentioned injection molding. You might also start getting the idea of, injection molding machine is $500,000. But we can just go to a company, give them our design, and they might make it for us for cheaper. So you start looking into potentially what the supply route is. Yeah.
Molds are still extremely expensive, though.
Correct.
Molds can be up to $100,000 for handheld objects or stuff like that.
Yep. I used to work with a 50-ton injection molding system, so I know that. There's actually a 5-ton injection molding system in Simon Park's group in mechanical engineering. And what you can do as if you're a startup is move towards making your own molds using CNC micromilling. But then you need a CNC micromilling system. And there is an art to making molds, especially for smaller parts. So that's why this company specializes in it, so that's really, really expensive. So can you make your first 1,000 devices using an SLA printer? There's a company, Boston Microfab. I've used them in the past to make some of the devices for my group because it just worked out that it would be cheaper to send it off to a company and spend a few $100s as I spend my students spending 3 months trying to build it themselves. So you've got to work out your costs, whether it's realistic. You're getting this idea of where, when you started off, you had like a, think of, I think I've used this example before, maybe not to this group. If I asked you all to write a poem, what would you do? I suspect I'd get very different poems. But if I said write a haiku, does anyone know what a haiku is? Yeah, basically you've got a set structure to it. Once you get a structure, you have more control over that, but it also gives you flexibility to work within that structure. You're starting off as a company with wide open ideas. You're starting with the kind of the prototype and things to build in, to give yourself some structure, some constraints, and then you work within those, right? You're building that out and getting the idea of where you're going to go. So as you go down, the further you go down the process, the more expensive it's going to get. So that's why brainstorming and everything at the beginning is good. So now, did I just skip a slide? Oh, apparently not. So we're now moving into, as you can probably gather, into the territory of the minimal viable product. Now, the words here is it's the bare minimum. It is the minimum you need that you hope that will be a product that somebody will hopefully want, right? In the ideal world, your MVP is something people will actually pay for, but that's not necessarily what you might want. You might make an MVP, send it out there to the first 100 people that have signed up to your newsletter and get user feedback, and that's more valuable to you than actually trying to get them to give you money. Because it will give you feedback on something that's almost a product. So you don't always necessarily have to be getting cash flow or revenue from your minimal viable product. It's nice if you do, right? But it's not necessary. Right? The main thing is we want to get this kind of, we're far down the process now. We've done multiple iterations of prototypes. We've got this to the point where this is good enough to put in a customer's hand. Our name is associated with this. Our reputation as a company is associated with this. And when you're a startup company, your reputation is important. So you don't want to be putting something out there that's shoddy, that's going to break, that's going to look bad. Right? So it's got to be good enough to be a product. It's got to be a bit more polished and refined. Right? So you're going to be validating your product market fit. You've already done all your customer discovery. You know they want 3 buttons and it flashes a light. You've given them something with 3 buttons and flashes a light. And you're hoping that your customer discovery was right and they didn't want 4 buttons. Right? But this is when you'll find that out. And then you could potentially come back and iterate. But hopefully you've got the right information there. So yeah, the feedback, service and operation. One of the hardest things sometimes to do is to give your MVP that you've worked on for a long time, put a lot of effort and thought and blood, sweat and tears into, give it to one of your clients, and they break it. They squish it, they bang it, they do whatever. Give it a toddle, what's going to happen to it? Right? What were the use cases you envisioned for the device, and what does the actual customer do with it? Hopefully, they're very close. But if they're not, you're going to get very useful feedback. And one of the really interesting ones there is sometimes it's give it to them and walk away. Leave them work with it. Because if you're hovering over them and saying, you're supposed to press button B now, you're not getting user feedback, you're guiding it. Yeah? So you want to give them the device and say, bring that back in a week and tell me what you think. They come back, well, it broke after 2 days because I know I kicked it and used it as a football. Oh, okay, I wasn't expecting that. It got wet, it got humid, it was cold, I went skiing, and it went -40, and it wasn't good. You want to look at the user experience, how they use your device, not how you think they should use it. This is where you're going to get a lot of information. And again, this comes back to this idea of, if you've done well with your initial prototypes, and you've had a lot of customer feedback, you've had a lot of use cases, you've looked at what other people are doing, you should hopefully meet those cases and your product is actually doing it. But you have to let them use it. Yeah? Who remembers Bendgate on the Apple iPhone? When they released one of the models of the iPhone and they hadn't tested it for people sitting on it. And they all bent. Big scandal. Apple can't design anything. They're making things too thin. They just forgot that people, stick them in the back pocket and sit on them. So they got bent. They made them thicker and stronger. Right? And you can imagine Apple spends a lot of money dealing with, before they a product comes out, they spend a lot of money and time doing this. So that was a bit of a surprise for Apple, right? Things like this happen. So yeah, you're validating your market fit. And sometimes it might be that you're going to find out which actual features the customer really, really wants, as opposed to what they told you in a survey. Right? Okay, get it in the hands, get it back, get the feedback, use for it. And another point that you can use here with your your pilot device, your pilot project, is you're now starting to spread the word about your brand. Right? You have a name associated with this. If you're very lucky, you can get your minimal viable product onto some website where they deal with early adopters, and they'll post glowing reviews, and you're going, yoo-hoo, right? Because that's generating a user base for buying your product. So this is also about branding, right? Also, basically, if you're listening to your clients, and they start saying, I really like this feature. Oh, this is nice. Think, ooh, maybe we should use that in our marketing campaign. Right? We hadn't thought of that. It's great. So you want to listen to what they're telling you. Right? And if you can, you might get some early sales, but that's the nice word that does. So the next thing is, how do you launch an MVP? I can't remember how many slides I've got. Oh, I'm going slow. Okay, how do I do? Yeah, I'll speed up a bit. You can do an app. That's kind of the obvious one these days. Everything's got to have an app. If you've got a physical product, you can do crowdfunding. And I'm going to talk about these more in a bit detail on the other slides. You can do a pre-ordered marketing campaign, which is slightly different. You can do what I've alluded to a little bit, is what is known as the Wizard of Oz style MVP. So I'm going to show you a little video about that one. That's where you kind of show something functional, but in the background you're doing it manually, basically. This one I don't recommend, but it has been used successfully by some companies. What is known as a fake door minimum viable product, where you say you've got something, you get pre-sales, and then well, I'll go through it in a bit more detail, but then basically, once you find out that people have paid for things, you find out what they wanted, and then you go and build it. And if you don't build it in time and to spec, your reputation is trashed. But you can get early revenue that way. So web apps launching, I just showed you, we can do a lot of stuff these days with online apps. There's all sorts of apps out there to help you put together a web page very easily, nice graphics. We've all got very high resolution phones. We can do videos and slow-mo. There's tons of things. We can load promotional videos to YouTube now. There's so many ways to do kind of an online launch, right? And get some initial information. You might not even actually, you can actually do a marketing campaign almost and say, we're going to launch. Sign up and we'll to our newsletter. Then you get an idea of market traction. How many people signed up, right? You get an idea. If you've got the app and you've got a basic app and they're going to press the buttons, you can see actually how they used it. If you've got the surveillance software in the backside of it, you'll see how they move around your app. Which parts of the app aren't used? Which parts are the most requested? Many different things like that to get this kind of information. Then there's Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and many others. And you can utilize these to get some funding. Now, there's a couple of caveats around these. They are typically full of people who are interested in looking at the next best thing, early adopters, and what they want to give feedback, a lot of these groups. They're interested in trying new things, right? And so if you can engage them early and get the feedback from them, they are very, very useful because they're going to give you a lot of advice for free, right? Some of them may be very opinionated though, so you've got to look out for that. But they will actually help you go through this. Now there's a couple of different ways these kind of campaigns can go. And has anybody actually been involved with like a Kickstarter campaign or anything? Has anybody ever bought anything off a Kickstarter? Seriously? Okay. I'm not the only one in the room. Thanks for that. So you have to know, as a person coming in, anybody going on to Kickstarter knows that the product might not get built and you lose your money, right? Because you're trying to get to a certain level of funding where they've said, okay, if we get to 200,000, we can build this, and we'll send this out to the first 100 people that signed up, for instance. So you're getting revenue, and then you try and build. Again, with the pre-ordered ones, they are saying, we're going to build this, give us the money now, and then what they'll probably do is then send the design off to China, get the device made, ship it back, and then give it to you. Go, ta-da, we had a 6-month lead time, right? So there's a couple of things like that out there. Most of the times with successful crowdsourcing campaigns, you have a really good video or animation to engage people. You need to get it in front of people, so they want to get some kind of marketing campaign going there. But a lot of things like Kickstarter and the other ones, they have their own way of helping you promote your idea. So you have free marketing that way, right? You start going to get your brand image and messaging on board. And typically, you have to have marketing beforehand to get people to start signing up, right? And then that's helpful with the getting people then to give you money at the other side of it. So I'm just going to run a quick video, I hope. If I could work out where my mouse had gone.
Hi Kickstarter, my name is Eric.
Wow.
This is my smartphone, and this is my pedal.
I've got no control of the volume.
Pedal Pebble is a watch that you can customize. It runs a lot of cool and useful apps, and connects wirelessly by Bluetooth to your iPhone or Android smartphone. This is our dream team. It started with a prototype built from cell phone parts. That led us to our first commercial product, the Impulse smartwatch for BlackBerry. The number one question we received was, when will the watch work with my iPhone? Well, we're proud to say that we can finally answer that question. This is Pebble. It's the only watch that works perfectly with iPhone and Android smartphones. Pebble is much smaller.
I'm going to stop it there because it goes on for about 2 minutes. Did anybody have heard of Pebble? They essentially started the smartwatch industry. They did a Kickstarter campaign in 2012, so some time ago. How much do you think they raised? You might know. With this very basic video, and after you watch all the rest of it, it's a bit chunky and it's not great, but... Oh.
Hi Kickstarter, my name is Eric.
No, next. That slide doesn't want to go. There we go. They raised just under $10.5 million off this video. That's not bad going, considering the production quality wasn't great. But they were very clear about what they were doing, why it was different. It will work with Android and iPhone at the time. Nobody else had anything that did that. Right? And the great thing about these kind of campaigns is once you've built brand loyalty, you can do it again. So they did in 2015. They raised $20 million with 75,000 backers. The great thing about the second one is they already had the proof from the first one that they could deliver. So more people were interested, more people had seen this actually work. Right? That was that idea of progression. And if you watch the video for the second one, they had learned from their first release what people wanted, other things. Right? So then they added those into the next release. So they listened to their customers and they worked from that. They basically started the smartwatch industry, and their IP was bought by Fitbit. Right? And it was a very essentially simple idea, but 10 odd years ago, there were none of these Apple Watches or the Google Watch smartwatches, the Samsung smartwatches. They started the whole thing, really. And so, simple way of getting the message across and then getting the funding to basically work on it. So the next one, so they're very powerful, these activities. So the next one is called the Wizard of Oz. You give the user an experience. They think they know what they're getting. They do get delivered what they want, and they think it's happened a certain way. And in reality, you're kind of running around in the background making it work, and it's not quite what they think. So I'm going to run another quick video about this concept.
Minimum viable products. They come in all... Coolest name. Join me as we throw back the curtain on the Wizard of Oz MVP. Hi, this is Gary. Welcome to Development That Pays. It's 1999. You're thinking about selling shoes online. You know that people buy shoes. What you don't know is whether people will buy shoes online. After all, it's 1999 and it's never been tried before. So you devise a cunning plan. You go into town, you go into shoe shops, and you take photographs of shoes. You sneak out again, back to the office, and upload photographs to a website. What happens when someone buys a pair of shoes? Not a problem. You pop back into town, pop back into a shoe shop, and you buy the shoes. Next up, the post office, where you ship the shoes off to the customer. This, as you might have spotted, is the story of the early days of Zappos. It's the best example I know of a Wizard of Oz MVP. So called because from the customer's point of view, everything appears to be in place. The customer has no idea that behind the scenes, it's a little bit manual. In the Zappos case, all of the going into town, going to the shops, taking photos, going back into town, going back into the shops, buying shoes, it's all hidden behind the curtain. From the customer's point of view, the Zappos business looked and operated like a fully functional e-commerce operation. I love the Zappos story with one teeny-weeny reservation. It's not directly applicable to my world. For one thing, it's been a long time since I dealt with a physical product. Perhaps you thought the same. Let's take a look at a couple of other examples. In each case, see if you can guess what's lurking behind the curtain. First up, Aardvark. This was a service about connecting people with questions to people with the expertise to answer those questions. What was behind the curtain? Perhaps a neural network of stunning complexity? Nope.
To help them kind of verify the process, because Amazon started out just with books originally, and they were literally going into bookshops and things. So this idea is, what Amazon is now is nothing like what it was envisioned at the beginning, and Zappos and others like that showed you how to get that information. The customer had a great experience. Online, book, shoe, whatever, turns up. We all know currently, Amazon warehouses, there's lots of people running around putting things in boxes, right? They're going to try and make it automate it with robots and things, but it's still a lot of people doing things manually in the background.
Minimum viable.
Thank you. The fake door MVP is, again, selling the ideas. You make a fake door, you make this app, you say, it does this one function. And by the way, do you want it to do these other functions? If you do, sign up, pay some money, and we'll get it to you in 6 months' time. Right? So the idea about that is you get an idea from the customers who are giving you money, what they want. Then you rank all the things they've said, and you do the ones you got the most money for. Problem with that is you might have lots of people paying money for something that's ranked 4 or 5. You then have to say to them, oh, we haven't done that one. So then you have a bit of a brand hit. But if you do the top 3, you're going to have a lot more satisfied customers because they wanted it, because they've already paid for it. If after you do this and you haven't delivered on the timescale you said, then you have a massive brand hit. So with the fake doors, it's quite dangerous. You must be confident that you can build what you said you will to satisfy the customer that's already paid for it. Right? It's a bit like Kickstarter in a little way, but Kickstarter has a bit more behind it to protect the clients. So there's an example here. You'll get the slides later. This group basically said, we've got a free app, it will automatically send you 1 post a day about whatever your product is. And if you want it to do more, like send 2 a day, 4 a day, have it have different user groups that it sends to, all these different things. They asked the clients for money, and then they actually went off and built the things that they want. And they had to go and develop it, right? And deliver it to customers. It's great when it works, but it has been quite a few things that have gone wrong. So what's the other one you can do? Our friend AI comes back. If you're going to do some kind of app system and you want a basic website to test something, you can just put in there some code. Write a simple website. The website has a header called New Product. Features a hot pink and orange color screen with white background. There are 3 boxes. Basically it makes it. But you can export that HTML code. So therefore, you now just got straight away your initial first website. And then you can say, if someone presses the cost button, it will go down here. And go that. So you can build very quickly a web app to walk through what it's doing. It doesn't have anything in the background for buying things yet, but you'll get the user experience. So, a little bit to summarize. there's a lot of overlap between a more high fidelity prototype and the MVP, right? But there are some significant differences. Your prototypes is initial testing of your concept and your first visualization of what your idea is, talking to people about it. It's going to build into your MVP, you're going to progress to that, and you can use it as a pitch tool to get some of the money to develop your MVP. That's exactly what startups do. We've got this widget, it's great, look what it's going to do, give us some money, we'll go and make thousands of them, right? The MVP is going to validate your product market fit. Hopefully you've done a lot of that already with the prototype, but this is the one that's really going to go out there and start getting your brand out there. Key features, messaging, potentially generates your first sales. You're going to get the slides, but then a little quick bit at the end about kind of working lean/agile, depending how you want terminology. If you're doing kind of more software, I've talked more with prototypes here, with kind of web pages, potentially web apps, and physically making things. Lean is a concept that came out of Silicon Valley, mainly in the software engineering side, but it's been kind of applied to startups as a way of iterating and prototyping faster. Every startup is the least amount of money, minimum amount of time. As a startup, one of the biggest things you have is your time, especially as students, you're doing things, well, you don't have time as students, but your time to spend on things is a bit wider than if you were working a full-time job. Least amount of money, minimum amount of time. What can you do in that time? How do you maximize everything? So basically you have your idea and you go, haha. You then go and build your original prototype. Whatever you've been doing just now, you do your first prototype. You come back down, you test. You get some information. And the biggest thing that everybody forgets to do, this is where I think everybody keeps hitting back on all these panels and things. You've got some information, either through your own testing or from a customer, you need to reflect on it. You need to stop and think. And think about what people have said, what information you have gathered, and does it make sense to carry on? Does it make sense to say, this was good enough, this is my MVP, I'm going to launch? Or does it still need some work? And I'll brainstorm some changes and reiterate. If you're in software, what I've just described is a sprint. Right? A sprint is a repeatable work cycle focusing on a specific goal. Right? Mostly they're 2 weeks long in software, but this is where this concept comes into kind of startups and making physical prototypes as well. But in software, you generally spend about 2 weeks on it, and you do a bunch of code, you test it, you reflect on it, then you see what to do with it next. But, again, as engineers might want to run in and go, I'm going to do lots of code, right? You have to have clearly set goals. You have to know why you're doing it, right? So you have to have sat down, worked out your customers, worked with your people, worked out what your goals are. This needs to work fast. Great. Is 0.1 second refresh rate fast enough? Does it have to be much faster, slower? What does it need to be? What are you programming for? How much memory do I need? Etc. All that stuff, right? Then, as you're going through the sprint, how do you track that you're actually doing it? Right? Who is doing what? Goals have been set, tasks have been set. And then you basically run through that. So this was developed, as I said, in Silicon Valley, mainly for software engineering, but you can see how this process applies to kind of any startup. Have a short period of time. If you're making a physical prototype, it could be a month. And say, a month here, we want this physical prototype with these, basically, features. Everybody does X, Y, Z. We'll meet in 2 weeks, check it. We're on track. As if we've got what we need. The goals are, we've met it. Then we reflect. Then we're going to build the next prototype. So that's how this has been moved into kind of the physical prototyping space in startups as well. So there's the cycle. And you've got to make sure, before the sprint, you set your goals, what you're going to do, who's doing what, what's going to be used to track your progress. And then at the end of it, whether you basically get to the abandon, launch, or reiterate and change. And sometimes, if you have the ability, You might have what is known as a scrum master, a facilitator, someone that makes sure everybody's doing the things they're doing. In a startup company or in a new team and things, it's probably going to be one other team. If you're a larger team or you need help focusing, you might want them to get an external scrum master, somebody that comes in who's not emotionally attached to your product, who's more interested in making sure that you are meeting the goals of your sprint and the people are doing the right things. Has anybody watched Silicon Valley, the TV show? There's a bit where they've got the Scrum Master and they start doing the whole process of doing this, right? It's a very good example of how, if you're doing software, this kind of stuff goes. If you can, watch the first 6 episodes of Silicon Valley. Just watch the whole thing, it's pretty funny. So yeah, this is the concept, you run through it. And then the big thing is, don't just go, yay, we met some metrics, run off to the next thing. You've got to stop, you've got to reflect, you've got to think, well, were we measuring the right thing? Who had problems with what they were doing? What went better than we thought it would? What went worse? What were our takeaways? What are now going to be our next steps, which will either go to brainstorming changes, abandon, or launch. And if you're working in a company making physical devices, it could be you're working, this is a sprint on one aspect of the product, like the case, the design. Somebody else might be working on the background software. Somebody else might be working on the data storage. You can have different groups within your company doing different sprints, but then they have to be worked out that they actually talk to each other at the end of it. So the final product of the working lean is hopefully your MVP. Much better understanding of what everybody wants to do, more confidence in your decision making. If you're more confident in your decision making, you've had validation, there's basically much reduced risk of financial loss. Hopefully, if your customers have been brought into the process, you've got better rapport. And the big one is headache and time, right? So that's kind of a big overview of very complex topics. There's a good textbook called Working Lean, or there's another one, a good book called The Lean Startup, which incorporates these in a lot of the things I've talked about. And if you're going to be making some physical prototypes, you've already had a tour of the Makerspace. For those that didn't, this is in the School of Engineering, and it has basically 8 labs in it. You can go online, get the basic training, go there, get some more training, and then you can just go there and use it. It's free. So it's a huge resource for those of you building physical prototypes. There's also a gaming room there as well, so if you've got any hardware acceleration stuff you want to do. But they don't advertise that one as much. It's not on my slides. So yeah, they've got the kind of major headquarters. They've got a robotics section, music and sound lab, arts and textile room, a machine shop, lots of things. There's actually got a huge, I think it was 40 odd the last time I saw them, but I think they've got more, 40 3D printers. There's a lot of stuff that they've got. It's very, very useful. So go there. They can even do welding and painting if you're kind of getting to that level. And obviously, for the capstone students, you're already in engineering, so you probably already know about this, but it's open to everybody on campus. So anybody, so you can use that. And I think that's it. I'm on go. Any questions? Any more questions, I should say? Right, yeah. Yes.
Thanks. Sorry, when we're launching an MVP, should we be launching it in multiple markets to see how it performs in those different markets, or should we just try it out with one spot first and then see from there?
That's something every group is going to have to think long and hard about based on what their product is. If you go too broad, I think this actually links into some of the commentary from the workshop on Tuesday from Mariella. When you look at your market and everybody does the big circle and goes, oh, it's $10 billion market, and it's worldwide. It's like, yeah, but you can't deliver to 10 billion people. So what is your addressable market, right? And what is the segment you're targeting? If there are multiple segments, which one is the most important to you? Right? If you have the ability to make enough of your initial prototype and get it to multiple markets, that's fine. Go for that. But you really want to identify which one is going to give you the best feedback, and which one is the best use of your resources to target. Right. So most startups in North America will target the US market because it's bigger. But if you're a startup based in Europe, you might think of France or the UK or Germany, not the entirety of Europe, and they all have different regulations. So that will completely change how you think about your launch, depending on if you're a North American startup or a European startup, or a Canadian. So there's many factors that's going to control what you do. Sorry.
And we have a question from online. Is the welding shop open to non-student entrepreneurs?
Is the what, sorry?
The welding shop.
I don't quite know how they handle access. I know mechanical engineering students get training in there as part of their degree, but I don't know if they would just weld something for you. Some of the equipment they use, and you just basically give them stuff and they will make it. I'm not sure if anybody has an answer to that.
I believe you have to be student or faculty to use the machine shop.
Yeah.
But you could email them.
Yeah. Ask them, basically, is the answer. Yeah. Okay. They will let everybody know what is required. Yeah. So the commentary for those online was, if you need certain types of PPE, personal protective equipment, like steel-toed shoes, to go into certain aspects of the makerspace, they will let you know what you need. They may also provide it, so goggles and gloves and things, depending on what you do. I know some things, like some of the lathes are available. I'm not so sure about the welding side of things. They do training on that. If it's not a piece of equipment that they will train a student on, they will do it for you. There's a technical staff there. So go to the Maker Multiplex and Zeta, log on, and go through what they've got, and they will guide you. Yep.
So for a SaaS product,
Mm-hmm.
what would you suggest? Like, how would you suggest to go about launching an MVP? Like, as you mentioned, that like kind of like a pre-ordered marketing campaign, or how should you go about for a SaaS product?
Okay. So the question was, how would you go about launching an MVP with a SaaS product? A SaaS product is a software as a service product. I'm not a software person, so this is just what I've heard from my colleagues who have done this. Many of the methods I've told you or mentioned today would work. Again, it works, depends on your target market, right? If you're targeting bankers, for instance, because it's more of a fintech style thing, then you want to talk to regulators and you want to talk to some of the more maybe independent banks, not the big ones first. You might also want to look at partnering with somebody like Neo Financial. So there's your market and the area you're targeting is going to give you some feedback as to where you should launch and how you could launch. Most of the times with software systems like that, there's going to be, is yours business to business, B2B, business to business, or?
It's a business to business. It's basically for business owners or services.
Right. So then you want to start talking to people like the Calgary Chamber of Commerce and find out who are the businesses in the space that you want to target, because you're not going to target the public. So you've got a different market, right? So find out what, ATB is the Alberta government kind of bank. They do quite a lot of things for startups. They might be interested in helping. So there's a whole bunch of things there you can try. Yeah, all right. Yeah, all right, cool. Anybody else? We are, I think, out of time. We're good online? All right. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I guess I should kill this. No worries, guys. I had a lot of examples and things.
No, I thought it was great. Like, super insightful. They're going to take away a lot of this.
Oh, that's good. Well, there were very good questions.